Alright, what's up everyone? For those of you who are subscribed, welcome back. And if you aren't already, hit that subscribe button, like, comment, share, do all of that. And I do welcome you for the first time. Before I say anything, I might get in trouble for this, but this is all for the purpose of education. I no longer am associated with this company. And you might be asking, oh, how are you so comfortable on the camera? I just spent the past hour talking to myself on stream. I wasn't really by myself, but I did get a message saying, dude, what are you streaming? And I realized I had hit start streaming and not stop recording. But like I said, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. And if you are interested in the Muay Thai channel, I'm also gonna hit that one down below. But with that said, let's get right into the video that I just spent an hour making and none of it was actually made and just somehow ended up on Twitch. So I want to start off here. So like I did mention in the other video where I shared my experience at working at Toyota, I did start off on 4/23 of 2021 as a loop tech, entry-level loop tech specifically. And at the time, the minimum wage in California for any establishment with more than 23 employees was at 14 an hour. And my previous employer, which I was at, which was Amazon, I was getting paid, I believe, 16 an hour. And so coming into here with what I believed was a trade or skill where you have to have some form of knowledge, I was expecting to get paid the same, if not more. When I did get hired, there was no negotiation. There was no real talk on what my pay rate would be. And at the time, I hadn't had any AACs. My first AAC was A6, which came in on the 7th month, which was what, July, like somewhere around July. And so with that said, I started off my new job and my potential career path as a entry-level loop tech at Toyota. I'm not gonna say which one. I started off at a whopping $15 an hour. And just a long story short, I did end up wanting to leave somewhere around August or September simply because I was offered a better pay rate elsewhere at a different dealership. And like I was mentioning on stream, the dealerships within your areas are in communications with each other. Because when I accepted my employment at the other dealership, the day after I got called at my dealership, I was called into the office and I was asked why I was quitting. I have a better future here, blah, 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 and all this nonsense. And saying that they had already had a raise ready for me, especially considering that I had already just turned in an ASE. So shortly after my employment, around 4 months after, I did get a raise at $16 an hour. My next raise came in at $17 an hour, but that was not a raise necessarily. It was simply because the minimum wage went up. Everyone got compensated with $1 more of their pay rate. Right after I turned in an ASE, shortly after the year started. So somewhere around, again, maybe April, March. So with the year starting, I did get bumped up another $1, which put me at 17. I shortly after turned in an ASE, which put me at 18. And then for some random reason, probably 7 of the 11 to 12 loop techs we had at the time quit. So their incentive to keep the best ones there, unfortunately I was one of them, was to give us another $1, and I ultimately ended up at 19. And I soon came to find out that I was the highest paid loop tech, and the one that followed was at 18, I believe. So just for number sakes, if I put 19 an hour times a basic 80 hours in a pay period, which is obviously 2 weeks, translates to around $1,520. Or if you want that weekly, that does translate to $760 a week gross pay, not net pay. So that's obviously before taxes. So if I remember correctly, on a regular pay period where I didn't put in any overtime, I was making around $1,200 to $1,300 a paycheck. And right after I finished school, or around the time I did finish school and I had more free time on my hands, I was making around $1,800, the most I ever came out with on, I don't know, I think it was like an hour and a half of overtime a day. I was roughly looking at like 6 hours of overtime a week, and that's ultimately how my checks came out to $1,800 net pay. But anyways, with that said, now we're gonna look into my pay stubs, and I'm gonna purposely pull up the 2 pay stubs where I made the most, and I did end up going exempt those 2 pay periods simply because I knew of how many hours we were clocking in, and it was in my best interest to go exempt for those 2 exact pay periods. And right now you'll see that there's a bunch of numbers, there's a bunch of calculations, there's a bunch of equations, letters, variables, and I honestly never really understood a lot of it. I was just mainly focused on, I knew if that my flagged hours were adding up to my hourly pay, then I wasn't really getting sand. So there's really going to be 3 numbers we're going to be looking at. The first off being after I was promoted as a line tech, or I was put at $21 an hour. So to make things more complicated, we were on a 4-day-a-week work schedule. It was 10-hour work days, 11 including your lunch. And this is the most simple way I can put it. So let's say this week right here. For perspective, I would have been off Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. However, I would have to work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, mandatory off Sunday, work this whole week up until Thursday for me to have Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. Then I'd go into work Monday, Tuesday. I once again would have Wednesday, Thursday off. Then I'd work Friday, Saturday. I'd be off Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, and then my schedule would repeat. So that's why you'll hear me say that 1 week I work a total of 10 days in the pay period. There's days I work 7 days in the pay period, and sometimes I do even work up to 12 days in a pay period. But I'm gonna try to make this as most simple as possible, even though, like I said, there's a bunch of numbers and there's a bunch of variables that went into my pay rate. But keep this in mind, I was making $21 an hour. That pay period, I worked a total of 98 clocked in hours. So I'm pretty sure, just by numbers, I was on a 10-day pay period this week. And when you translate that into an hourly pay, I made around $2,100. But again, that's hourly. At the time, I was a flagging technician, so I make flag hours, which basically means if I'm getting paid an hour to do an alignment, but I finish the alignment in, let's say, 30 minutes, I get paid an hour worth of work and I can get ahead on something else, which is how technicians make their money. So now, because I was flagging, in reality, I flagged a total of almost 140 hours. So even though I was only clocked in for a total of 98 hours, or almost 99, I guess, I flagged or completed a total of 140 hours of work. So the only difference this exempt is gonna really make was on my total net pay. I'll try to show on one of my pay stubs right here. Ultimately, as a flagging technician on that pay period of 140 hours, I ultimately made $3,100. But again, this is gross pay. So my pay stub for this pay period right here, and again, like earlier mentioned, there was a total of 94. Actually, I think it was a 90 pay period. My total earnings were $3,100. Because I went exempt, I was only taxed $300. In perspective, I should have been taxed around $600 to $700 this paycheck, but I walked out with a total net pay of $2,700. And again, I had to emphasize this. This is solely for educational purposes, and this is not meant to say this is exactly how much you're gonna make. This is what you're making. And as a flagging technician, there's weeks where you have as good as these, and there's some weeks where you make less than a loop tech. So there's that one. Now let's go into what was my best check by far that had ever worked. And to make situations more complicated, we were in a team system, which is a team of 4. And I can go into some other video about a team system versus working solo. Let me know if y'all are interested in that in the comments below. And so like I was mentioning on the team system, just the way that hours worked, just because we had cushion hours, which were hours that, let's say in a day we made more than 15, we'd cushion some of those hours that we made extra, and we carry on to the day after, assuming it was going to be a bad day. And even if it was a good day, that just meant we have more hours to carry on. With those same hours that we carried on, if for any reason one of our teammates was calling in sick or was missing on vacation, whatever was the situation, we take some of those hours and we leave some of them behind for him to keep as well. But ultimately, it just meant hours onto our paycheck for work that we had done as a team. And so what happened this pay period was a good portion of the hours were flagged by 3 of us, but jobs were saved in which ultimately were done by only 2 of us. And with that said, I clocked in a total of 102 hours. So I don't have the initial pay stub for that one, but we can likely assume I was on a 9 or 10 day pay period. And obviously as an hourly technician, I would have made around 2,100 gross pay. But now in terms of flagging hours, that pay period, whether it was 9 or 10 days, we flagged a total of 157 hours. And just for the sake of numbers, 157 divided by what I'm assuming was 9 days, more than likely. I'm not gonna say 10. Even if it was 10, let's just say it was 15 hours a day that we were flagging. But I remember clearly there was one day where we did flag 22 hours between 2 of us. We're looking at roughly 17 hours a day. And like I said, this was the best paycheck I had received my time at Toyota. So with 157 total flagged hours, I came out with a total of 3,400, almost 35. And again, I don't have the pay stuff for that one, but we're probably looking at, since I was exempt, around $3,000 in that check, which translates to $1,500 a week divided by 2. I was making around $1,750 a week that week specifically. You would divide it by 4.5 because I'm assuming there was a total of 9 days in that pay period. So I'm gonna do 4.5 for each week. Means I was making $388 a day. You divide that by the 10 hours a day that we were working, $38 an hour. This is considering as an hourly employee to make $3,400 or almost $3,500 in those 2 weeks, I would have to be clocking in at average of $38 an hour, 40 hours a week. And if you made it this far into the video, you're probably questioning, why is it that you complain so much? Why is it that you were complaining, saying that you weren't paid enough? One of my classmates was working at a different dealership with as many qualifications as I had. On paper, we were both equally the same. Worth ethic wise, I feel like we were neck and neck. He was getting paid as $30 an hour. We graduated with a hybrid certification from Toyota, and he got bumped up an extra $3. And for me, it was never considered. If anything, it was laughed at. So again, that's just my experience at the dealership I was stuck at. But the reason for my complaint was right now I'm showing my best 2 pay stubs. Now, if we take the time to look at an average pay stub, then things start to make sense. So like any tech, everyone knows that the really heavy work season falls around the start of the summer, so somewhere around early June, and ends somewhere around late October, right before November, where all the holidays start to begin. Christmas and New Year's and Thanksgiving are around the corner. So you'll have your peak season between, I'm gonna say, June to October, and your slow season will be obviously November up until early May. And as you can see right here, this pay stub is from 3/01/23 to 3/15/2023. So this is one of those slow seasons, and this is a pay stub, not a timesheet. sheet, so there's not really much I can go off of exactly on how many hours I was clocked in, how many hours I did flag. This is solely just going based off of numbers. And again, this check wasn't exempt, so this is exactly how much I was getting taxed at the time, or this shows more of a transparent view of how much I was getting taxed, how much I was getting taken away per check. So considering that I clocked in a total of 88 regular hours, 4 overtime hours, 4 rest and recovery hours, I'm considering I was on a 10-day pay period this paycheck. And as you saw on my prime paycheck, I was clocking in around 17 hours a day. It means I flagged roughly 13 hours a day this paycheck. But again, this is more of a rough estimate just because this is my pay stub, not my timesheet. So when you look at it from a perspective of a flagging tech who works 11 hours a day, whether you count your lunch in or not, because there was days we wouldn't really take our lunch. So even though we take our lunch, we wouldn't actually take a lunch. It'd be as quick as, let me get a bite in, let me continue working, let me take a bite in, let me continue working. Oh look, the hours on my timesheet, I can clock back in now, continue working. Again, I might get bashed in the comments saying, oh, you're still making more than a loop tech, you're still making more than a regular hourly employee anywhere else. Yes, you're right, but you're not considering that you have to buy your own tools. You're not compensated for them. You're also losing the ability to have your lunch and genuinely just enjoy it peacefully, and you have what is a really stressful job simply because you're getting pressured by the service advisors, you're getting pressured by management. So now for the final point, I am going to address my last check, and it's ultimately going to address how much I made at this place. So none of this over here really matters, just because considering this was my final pay stub and more so of a final check rather than my final work week. My real attention is on this right here, and these are the numbers I really want to kind of crunch down on. And as you can see here, it says my final check. So for the month of July, I almost didn't really work at all. I worked a total probably like 4 or 5 days max, simply because of how the schedule was set up, and because of July 4th I had my day set up to where I didn't have to go to work for 2 weeks in a sense. But this 1700 right here is including my hours that were cashed out from sick pay and from vacation pay.
All right, so this is me in the future and I need a haircut. That's not the point. The point right now is that the footage that I do have that follows didn't really get too deep into a detail I missed, and that is that this number right here is including my pay time off and my vacation pay, which the one detail that I missed was that pay was paid at $25 an hour and not 21, which is another reason why a lot of the techs did complain about the pay rates. And that was because if you were below the threshold of $25 an hour, you'd basically make as much, if not more, than your coworkers within that pay bracket. It was because either you use your pay time off or you use your vacation pay, and you get paid at $25 an hour flat. So if you were below that $25 threshold and your team, let's say, only made 9 hours, because you stayed home, you got paid at $25 an hour for 10 hours worth of work that you weren't there for. So like in my sense, I was getting paid more not going to work versus if I did show up to work, assuming my team only broke even on 10 hours. So for some reason, I can't bring up the calculator because my computer starts bugging out for some reason. But in terms of numbers, I would have to flag at least 12 hours a day to break even on the $25 an hour I'm making while using my pay time off or while using my vacation pay. So now with that said, it would be messed up to those who made more than the threshold of $25 an hour, because for them, the techs that were in the high to low 30s would be getting paid less than their regular pay because they called off or because they went on vacation. So for techs that were in my situation that were below the threshold of $25 an hour, we'd essentially make a joke saying that we'd make more calling off than we do coming into work, because on above average days we were looking at 13 to 14 hours, and on regular days we were looking at around 11 to 12, and obviously on our bad days we were barely breaking even at 10 hours, or we were making less than that. So with that said, I'm gonna take this rough estimate of 31,000 and divide it by the total of 8 months just to compensate for that factor of my pay time off and my vacation pay. So just for rough numbers and doing the math, we're gonna go 31,000 divided by 8, which means I was making $3,875 a month. And assuming that was my monthly average gross income, I multiply that by 12, it would mean I was scheduled to make around $46,500 a year. Hopefully it focuses, hopefully it works. If not, like I said, you can follow through and do the math with me. So by reverting that back to the $3,875 a month, if we divide that by 2, a paycheck I was making $1,937. You divide that by 80, and that means I was roughly making $24.21 an hour. And again, because these are rough estimates, give or take $1 or $2, I can say I was making around $22 to around $26 an hour while flagging at $21 an hour. So let me know down in the comments below if you think that tech pay is worth it. But again, there's so many variables that go into that. But ultimately what didn't change was, regardless, I was making $21 an hour. So let me know your opinion or your insight down in the comments below. And anyways, back to the video.
And I was blessed enough to be at one of the 3 top performing teams in the shop out of a total of 9 total teams. So once again, I am going to emphasize really rough estimates of absolutely everything. Again, I showed my tax exempt paycheck, I showed my regular paycheck, and I don't even think I got to show one of my worst paychecks, which I remember was one of my first few checks on the line, and I was paid less than what a loop tech made. And I remember one of my worst checks that I had ever received, it was a net pay of around $1,200, which ultimately was just slightly better than a loop tech. But again, I appreciate for everyone who did tune in for the first time. Like I said, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment down below, and if you already subscribed, thank you. I appreciate for tuning in back in. But with that said, this is the one of many videos I am going to get out. Thank y'all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.